Yeah.
And we're live. Good evening, everybody.
Okay. So, greetings, everyone. Welcome to this first of Blacklash, the Africana Collective. We are five individuals, one of which will come on a little bit while, where the collective came together to provide sort of what we terminally call a think tank. That is a process of people devoted to thinking through many of the topical issues and challenges that confront our national, but also global communities. And so for this first installment, we decided to tackle something that obviously is in front of us, which is the militarization of police forces. And rather than simply just focus on what's happening here in the United States, we want to obviously, make connections to and draw upon, expertise outside of the United States, in Africa and other parts of the world. And so I'm joined by four wonderful colleagues who helped to write the briefing or report that I hope you had a chance to get to. If you didn't, we'll provide the link so you can get to that report, which will give you a number of analyses as well as resources and perspectives to help us move through this times and others. And so I am Kwesi Kunadu. I'll be the moderator for this discussion. And the way the town hall will flow is that I will provide a quick introduction for each individual. They'll do that on their own. And then I will ask them within 2 minutes to sort of recap the major perspective from their research on the issue of militarizing police forces. And then I'll ask them a few questions, get it warmed up. And after that is really just the global community town hall. So all of your questions and concerns and thoughts, I'll be tracking them and be able to communicate that to the group assembled here. And this way, they can jump in, you can jump in at any point as we proceed with this town hall. We're looking to wrap up around 9 p.m. East Coast, Eastern Standard Time. And so we should be, in pretty good hands from here on out. We'll be joined shortly again by the fifth member, which is Brother Todd Burrows. So let's get started. So this collective, once more, came together at this crucial moment, which for many of us is not really unique or as momentous as perhaps the media has made it out to be. But we thought of it as an opportunity to gather us into this space in order to really, think through, what it is that we're seeing, how to make sense of it for our families, for ourselves, and for our linked communities. And also to provide what often is missing in the news cycle, and of course on the chatter online, which is analysis that, is not a prisoner of the moment, nor liberated by it. And so we wanted to, have some analysis of really what's happening, but also to work together to poke away, forward, in this particular moment. And so the collective was formed to not only tackle this particular topic, but also others that we will proceed with. So for instance, and you hear this again before we close, the next topical issue that we'll tackle for, next month will be the Confederate flags and monuments. And we can add to that other kinds of national monuments. And then, of course, we're gonna follow up other topics such as the category of blackness, being black, and what benefits and limitations comes with that for our communities and how we proceed in this world as linked communities. And so that and more will be coming your way, and so check for that in the near future. So at this point, what I want to do is just lean on my colleagues here to ask them to give a 2 minute synopsis of their major finding and takeaway, and then we use that as a springboard for our discussion. Let's see, who shall we start with? Let's start with Sister Njiba, because she's live from Accra, Ghana, and it's past her bedtime. But of course, her commitment is unwavering, and so we want to tap into her first, and then we'll move around and get the others involved.
Thank you, Brother Kwesi. It is definitely past my bedtime. I do appreciate that you let me go first, just in case I get a little sleepy later on. So I have 2 minutes, and I'll sum up my my statement very quickly, hopefully, and then hopefully we can get to engagement. So ultimately, my thoughts is that this question of the militarization of the police is really just an apparatus of U.S. imperialism, right? And as an apparatus of U.S. imperialism, the police ultimately reinforce, and even the militarization of the police reinforce sort of this global capital power structure. And what does that do? Ultimately, what that does is it begins to promote people over profit, right? And so when you think about the militarization of the police, you see that the police are not in any nation really promoting people, right? They're not really there to protect and serve. They're there to protect and serve the state. And the state ultimately is trying to protect and serve their interests. And the state's interest is oftentimes tied directly to the ruling class. And the ruling class is led by an economic system or ideology, which oftentimes impacts them as capitalists. And so my fundamental analysis is that the militarization of the police is part and parcel of the larger capitalist system. And when you look at the ruling class and you look at the ideology that's tied to the ruling class, and of course everyone knows that ideology is really a set of ideas and principles that guide our lives, right? Many of us are guided by ideology, but we're just not even aware that we're guided by a capitalist ideology. This question of rampant individualism, this question of private property, this question of survival of the fittest, right? And so when you have the police and the military and the global context operating on behalf of the US and US imperialism and even Western nations and large corporations, they're ultimately defending the state and corporations. And so like a good example of this is we always talk about coltan in the Congo, and there's a civil war in the Congo. Over 1 million people have lost their lives. 1 in 4 women will be raped in their lifetime in the Congo. And so one may ask, but why have a civil war? Why not have, peace, and then you can easily mine the coltan? Well, the reality is you can only exploit a people when there's disunity. And this is the role of the militarization and the police. If you look at the African continent where I find myself sitting today, there's this question of AFRICOM, the United States Africa Command, right? There's this model of United States military coming and training African military in order to follow US military warlike settings, right? So they're basically training them to be a fifth arm of the United States military. And what you find is that with that training comes ideological clarity. It comes ideological allegiance to the US. I think my two minutes is up, so I'm going to totally round up. So what you have, for example, in Ghana on June, I think it was 4th, there was a Black Lives Matter rally at Black Star Square. And one of the leaders of the Economic Fighters League who organized the rally was arrested at a Black Lives Matter protest on the African continent in Ghana. At Black Star Square, right? So, but that's because the military in Africa is trained by AFRICOM. And AFRICOM ultimately, it doesn't just train you how to use a gun, but it uses the more dangerous training is the ideological training. And the last thing I want to say before I finish, because it's a very, very difficult thing to sum up in 2 minutes, is that ultimately the police, they reinforce this race and class-based discrimination, right? Specifically in the US, there's a class and race-based discrimination that's reinforced by the police and even the militarization of the police. And in places like Brazil, in Colombia, in Venezuela, you also have the police reinforcing a race and class-based discrimination against African people. And so when we begin to think about how do we address the militarization of the police, we need to do 2 things. One, we need to recognize that the militarization of the police is not just bringing a tank in the hood or driving up and down the street, with a military tanker or over policing. That's not it. The militarization of the police, they are ultimately protecting the capitalist system, which is not in your best interest. 1. And 2, the way in which we must combat the over militarization of the police is not necessarily reform tactics, although they do help mitigate some small amounts of abuse, but they come back after a while. The way we must do that is we must liberate and unify Africa so that Africa can ultimately defend her people in the diaspora who are being disproportionately killed by the police. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, Sister Njiba, thank you very much. We'll move on to Dr. Jared Ball.
All right, what's up, everybody? First of all, I want to thank everybody for joining us, and really for Dr. Conadu for leading this effort and bringing us all together. I really can't think of more important endeavors for those like us to be engaged in this kind of collective to try to figure these things out. In fact, one of the points I wanted to make is that too much individual punditry is dominating the landscape. So regardless of its conclusion, it's often just offered up as a lone individual, not coming from collective work. Often, I would argue, not thinking about collective in its own approach. Anyway, so for me, this is sort of what I'm going to slightly amend even just what was for my comments for the written piece, just because even since then, my focus has actually increased on the side of the propagandized response to the police violence that many of our folks are engaged in really around the world. So to echo briefly.
Your mic sounds like it's going in and out. I don't know if that's just me.
Okay, you know what?
I just want to make sure everybody can hear what you're saying.
Gracious. Is this different? Can you hear me?
Yeah, can you talk a little?
I'm not sure what's going on my end.
That's better, I think.
Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay. Apologies, everybody. I'm really not sure what's going on my end here tonight, but this is just clearly something failing me. Anyway, I'll just wrap up my points. Was that essentially I want to just briefly focus on the origins of the police, their colonizing origins, their origins in suppressing labor. I think Njiba covered that, and we'll come back to that, I'm sure. I mentioned in my piece, in my comments, the film Do Not Resist. That's something I really want to encourage everybody to look at, because in a sort of cinema verite way, you see cops in their normal function, uninhibited by punditry, narration, or anything. And what is clear is what they think their mission is, at least here in the United States, which is to suppress savagery, to get up the amount of arrests, to be the spearhead or the vanguard in their conception of civilization. They talk of themselves as the last, wall, the last line of defense for civilization. And by that, I think it's pretty clear they mean white civilization. And to that end, as I heard someone else say recently, there really is no reforming this. There is no swaying this. There is, if not full abolition, really only radical adjustments that can be made to the institution of policing that I think can help us here. And this is the part where I think my focus has increasingly become the propagandized responses we're encouraged to follow that are themselves responses to our own response to police and state violence. So that is to say, through corporate public relations campaigns, through bringing out celebrity, by politicians trying to reframe their platforms to somehow appease the moment and ultimately bring us all back in terms of the collective agency and action to voting for Democrats. All of this energy is being done to blunt what is really our only potential for true change, which is social and people organized power. It's not economic. It's not certainly in the way it's framed now, mainstream politically. Those are where I think we can go for answers. We have to reconfigure ourselves in terms of social, political movement power. And then I'll stop there and try to fix my audio video and let others talk. Thank you very much.
Okay, Brother Jared, thank you very much for that. And certainly we'll get that echo cleaned up. Sister Yale, could you kindly share, your perspective on this matter of militarizing police force?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Welcome, family. So in the report, my statement, my contribution was really revolving around an understanding that I had through studying history that the militarization of police really is simply a remilitarization, an intensification of an attitude that is not just found within the police. It is essentially America's militaristic attitude toward African people generally, right? And we can talk about the deputizing of everyday average white people in the Black codes. We can talk about how everyday average white citizens participate regularly in vigilante violence. The whole country is militarized against Black communities, right? So the militarization of police is simply a kind of more profound and intense expression of the same general attitude. It's the ocean we're swimming in, right? But what our response needs to revolve around, and what I think hopefully it is revolving around, is particularizing privilege and power. So that's what I kind of reported on. Particularizing privilege really means expending less energy explaining to white people what their privilege is, the nature of their privilege. I believe they know it intimately. All you have to do is ask them to bump up against it in some kind of way, and oops, there it is. The perception's all clear. We need to particularize the names, the faces, the institutions, the policies that work against us, and not be mild in our response, and not be mild in terms of seeking appropriate consequences for those things. I think we've been doing that. We're working on and increasing our capacity to do that. But particularizing and being very specific about each aspect of the problem, each aspect of policing, each aspect of the militarization that we see happening. And then not only particularizing privilege and a certain type of power, but particularizing our own power. That's another thing we don't always do. Take inventory of what we have, what resources we have to respond. And also trying to find ways to understand what Black powers, and I'm using plural on purpose, Black powers are that are different from white powers. If we try to replicate their power, then what we're doing is playing the game. We're playing their game, and we can't win playing someone's game on someone else's terms. How do we bring the fight onto our terms, onto our battlefield, right? This is why the Haitian Revolution is such an amazing example of how that worked. Those Africans use their military skills and their African ways of fighting to bring the fight onto their turf, into their terms, into their purview, into their worldview. So in particularizing our power, I'm thinking that this involves finding places of our contradictions, places of unity. And unity does not mean sameness, right? It was the diversity of the Africans fighting in Saint-Domingue that allowed them to win. It's like muscle confusion on the battlefield, right? But we need to take stock of all of the different Black powers that we have and operate from that place, a place that our enemies, the enemies of humanity, the people militarizing their lives to respond to our lives, the places they can't go, the places that are bot resistant, the places that drones can't see. Those places involve spirit, those places involve culture, those places involve collective action instead of vulgar individualism. Those places are places where we find common purpose, right? Our approaches don't have to be exactly the same to this, but we can't be disunited from the tools we have. We can't be disunited from each other. And unity is not just found, and Kwame Ture says this eloquently, unity is not just found in what we don't want. We can't, a lot of us define Blackness as like, we suffer the same kind of oppression, right? And that's what we're here to talk about. But another side of the connection has to be, what it is we do want and what it is we do have. So yeah, I hope to get more discussion with you. I can't wait till we talk about solutions based on some of these understandings. Thanks again.
Okay, Sister Ailey, thank you very much. We're getting warmed up. Jared, do you want me to share my 2 cents and then get Todd in, or you want to get Todd in?
Jared, you muted.
I know.
Jared.
And you go ahead. Am I still echoing?
Not really. You're
okay.
good.
You go ahead, and then if you don't mind, I'm gonna take you off this and bring the crowd on, but you'll still be here, of course. And then we'll go from there.
Okay.
I'll be here in spirit.
You'll be here
also in the flesh.
Here.
Yes. So, greetings, everyone. So, I'm not only playing, moderator, to this wonderful cast of extended family, but I also had a small contribution to the briefing, the report that the collective had produced. And in the 2 minutes, that I have, and I'll take about a minute and a half. And then in the report, my basic point was this: is that on the one hand, this matter of militarizing police is really not about arming the police, because the history of the police in the United States and other places which Sister Njiva has spoken to was that early policing, or essentially the sort of watchman, community watch model. Police were not armed. And so if police were not armed in their early configuration, then this might be a matter about the Second Amendment, which essentially allows any person who believe that they are white and can provide the pigmentation verification that they subscribe to the values of being white. They are within their Second Amendment right to form a militia at any point. And what's really, crucial here is that the Second Amendment, in fact, is precisely, literally what armed, white folks in any particular matter. And so the police, therefore, is simply one militia. The Texas Rangers is another militia. These vigilante groups that are storming state capitals, another militia. And so what we have here is a series of confounding militias, right, that are operating simultaneously. And so if we target the police, I think we might miss in our scope the sort of the fuller view that essentially what we have here is the prerogative to form militias, the uncontrolled prerogative to form militias that in fact can execute extrajudicial killings as a jury of 1 or 2 or 5 or 200 whites see fit. But then again, it's not only about the Second Amendment, because once, you know, African peoples who later became casted as African American and Black began to arm themselves, then the laws began to change. And so then we say, well, if it's not about the Second Amendment, it's about this thing called race. Well, yeah, it's about race, but it's also not about race, because notice the profile of the peoples, you know, who have been on the other receiving end of this militarized violence, right? These are not people who are celebrities, who are elite. And granted, you know, we can toss in there, you know, Bill Cosby's son and a few others, but for the most part, the people are not in the elite, right? That are being looped on our regular and social media in chokeholds with knees on their necks, and of course with bullets in their backs. That these people, by and large, that are meeting their ancestor much too early, these people represent a particular sort of underclass. So there is race there, but it's also class, which means that the way that race and class works in this society, it is a tightly braided marriage, right? You can't separate the two because they operate, you know, in tandem, right? And so, you know, my sense is that what has worked, you know, to a limited extent in the recent past is that you take the most notable white terrorist organization, which is the Ku Klux Klan, among several others, is the White Knights and others, but we'll pick on the Klan for a moment. The Klan were cowards, meaning that they rarely ventured into, you know, communities where African peoples were in significant numbers and were armed. And so one of the powers we have available, you know, sort of Black powers have available, is clustering, right? It's clustering. It's families, right? Places which we have a certain bit of liberatory space is within our families, within our households, to the extent that we are armed with the perspective and the analysis to allow us to make the decisions that, you know, push, you know, our, you know, communities forward. So I'll stop here and allow Brother Todd to jump into the conversation.
Thank you. I'm so educated by this and so appreciate this. The only thing that I have to add to such an extraordinary discussion is the election year analysis, and to put the election year analysis into this. We have a Republican Party candidate who is portrayed by the Republican Party or by ex-Republicans who are on television making a lot of money attacking him. He's portrayed as insane, but actually from our eyes and ears, we know of him to be extremely sane. And he is directly articulating an analysis, whether publicly or privately, as we know from the Bolton book about to come out, right? He's projecting an analysis that is so clear in terms of the historical through line of white supremacy that it disturbs people to the point where they are trying to deny that reality. One only can look at the Occupy movement to see that the status quo of the police is consistent. They may have a different approach to, let's say, young white radicals who are, you know, sitting in front of Yale University, you know. But, you know, when I remember Occupy was this huge white dominated movement that, you know, crumbled like an Oreo when the police stepped in and started acting like the police. You know, I never forgot when they took tear gas and very gently put them on the eyelids of these white kids. And, you know, they were privileged, so they didn't understand like the nature of the police. So I'm reading Rolling Stone, I'm reading Matt Taibbi, and he's actually coming to a conclusion about Occupy that we started with, which is why, you know, there were articles in the Village Voice, a paper I missed, as to why there were no blacks in Occupy. Well, because we understood the nature of the police. There's such an organic understanding that we have that we try to give to other people, but other people are caught, Ta-Nehisi Coates would incorrectly say dreaming, but no, they're not dreaming. They are denying purposely a reality that as African people, we've had to deal with for 500 years. So I think what's important to talk about is that when we're talking about dealing with a president that has such a level of sanity and honesty, I think we have to also be honest in our response. So we know the Democratic Party, for instance, is only going to go to a certain level, and we're going to have to push them all the way to the level that they can go to. And that requires maybe not being on MSNBC, being an intermediary. It may be quoting James Baldwin directly instead of talking about people who are writing books who are trying to position Baldwin in a certain way that makes people feel comfortable. I mean, we people who are in the white liberal realm have the two rules, right? And what are the two rules? You can't make them uncomfortable, and you can't call for real change. So for us to articulate a reality, we're going to have to articulate reality outside of that and make that reality as clear as the reality Trump is articulating that is so representative of the actual forces he actually represents. I mean, the only difference between Trump and Bush is that, Bush did it with finesse, right? Where Trump does it directly and rudely. So I think that having this kind of analysis that we have collectively articulated is important, but I think projecting that is the norm analysis and not the, Joy Reid, Eddie Glaude, kind of, because it's not about being an Oreo now, right? It's about being a smoothie, right? It's a very different concept. We've got to go and do with the entire range of dialogue. And that way we can actually have a real discussion that will lead us to what Frank Wilderson said, which is I'm not against police brutality, I'm against the police, right? I mean, he was saying this years ago, and now people are listening to him to the point they can listen to him because he's saying something that is accurate. So I have nothing deep to say other than the fact that what we're doing right now, we have to promote as the norm of reality, particularly for us around the world who are African people. And that's really all I have to say.
Right on. Kwesi, just as a point of, am I echoing again? I'm echoing again. No? Anyway, just as a point of procedure, at any point, folks can let us know if there's one of the off-camera presenters that they want to direct a question or comment to, and then we can bring that person on. I just tried. I unfortunately cannot remove myself and be one of the apps while I'm hosting, officially the host here. But anyway, so Sister Yeli is still here, and we can rotate her back in whenever. But anyway, go ahead.
Okay. So therefore, it is you, the global, African village, to borrow from Brother Todd. It is you all. I mean, what's on your mind? What kinds of points of view, questions that you have that we can toss out to the 5 or 4 actually that's here, to dig deeper into this very crucial topic.
We do have one question submitted by Brother Hakeem Muhammad. It's 2 parts. I don't know if you all can see it. But one, what are your views on the idea of renewing control of the police as proposed by Pan-African Community Action or PACA in DC? And 2, is the idea of reality in any town or city in the U.S.? Is anybody from PACA here? I don't know if net for anybody has showed up. Please let us know. I am technically a member or supporter of that organization, but I don't think I can speak for that organization on that particular policy. I would just say, in general, I agree with PACA, but I don't know that I could inform anyone specifically on how that organization approaches community policing. But if anybody else wants to address the broader question, and then certainly we can reconvene with Netfa and others from PACA and get some more details on that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Well, I mean, community control of the police. I mean, I can start with what's happening in Newark. There is a police civilian review board that is trying to get subpoena power. And the FOP, of course, is dead set against this. They've always been dead set against this. But they're particularly dead set against this one because our police review board was done this way. The mayor, Ras Baraka, the son of Amiri Baraka, actually went to all of the community organizations and said, pick your representative and we'll put your representative on this board. So all of the Black radical and Latino radical groups pick their representatives, and that's our police civilian review board. And so the police are fighting this tooth and nail, putting this up in the Supreme Court because they don't want that control of the police because they know the subpoena power would be the first step toward that control. Mayor Baraka in Newark has tried to, talk about other things in terms of trying to stop having the confrontational nature of the police. I mean, he's tried some basic reforms there. But what he really wants is that community control. The police should live in our community. And many of our police officers do live in our community. And we actually have conversations with them, which I know sounds strange in this environment, right? But I think that revolution that we seek is going to have to be as a result of a process that's going to have to go step by step by step. But the steps have to be real steps and not liberal steps.
Can I jump in there?
Sure.
Thank you. So I think that so let me just say this. I'm an academic, but I'm also a member of the All African People's Revolutionary Party. So when I speak from that ideological framing. So this question about, police sort of review boards, whether it's staffed by, revolutionary or progressive people, and community control of the police, or perhaps community engagement with the police, I think is a little bit difficult for me to kind of swallow. And not to say that I don't think that there shouldn't be like community review boards to find, police that are, just disproportionately killing African people and changing things. And Ras Baraka, I'm sure is doing great things. But I think the challenge that we have with that approach is that it's really very much a reform approach, right? And it gives us sort of a monumental step to kind of change the lives of like some Africans, but it doesn't necessarily like transform the system, right? And so while I'm for, having a space where you got, revolutionaries, and progressive folks, Black radical, Latino, African, nationalists talking about we want to control the police and even review these cases, the fundamental contradiction isn't necessarily the police. The fundamental contradiction is the system in which we live in. And I even saw, and let me just say this, that Ras Baraka, of course, is doing some interesting things within the limits in New Jersey. So I think that we have to also take this as a reform step, right? Just like affirmative action, just like some of these other reform actions that ultimately change the lives of a few African people, which is fine because, you don't want like a whole bunch of people getting, shot indiscriminately, but then in like 10 years, it'll be repelled, or in 5 years, it'll be what is it? Pulled back. And then we'll be back to the same contradiction. So if we really want to start having some real sort of institutional change, we need to be talking about not just abolishing the police, but we need to be talking about abolishing this capitalist system in which the police protect. And I think someone put in the chat that something basically about the ruling class protecting the police, and the ultimate thing that's it. The ruling class will always protect the police. That's how come nobody ever gets like really convicted. Because if you start convicting people who are killing people on your behalf, then nobody's gonna join the police force or the military, right? And I take this back to a brother Yaru in the APRP, been in the APRP over 40 years out the Philadelphia chapter, and he talks about his time in Vietnam, right? And he says he was a tunnel rat in Vietnam. And Brother Yuru will tell you these vivid stories. And he said when he was in Nam, him and his other African brothers, they weren't necessarily politically conscious. They were there, you know, fighting the Viet Cong. Of course, they were getting beat down. And the Vietnamese people would drop propaganda from planes, propaganda. And he even has a piece of that propaganda that he kept from that time period. And ultimately, what he realized was that he was on the wrong side, right, of history. And I think that we have to recognize that even when you have citizen review boards, and that helps one or two Africans, you find yourself ultimately in the long run on the wrong side of history. And that's kind of and I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but I'm saying we have to understand that with these types of institutions, there's serious limitations. We get all excited and whoop, 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 we're excited because we have a victory, but we don't really have a victory. It's just to keep us from being out in the street. So those are my opinions.
Okay, great. Other questions, other thoughts from the townspeople?
We do have the ability to have people come on screen and ask the question themselves if they are interested in that, and maybe their audio is working better than mine. Otherwise, I asked, I'm not seeing a name here, but I was asking someone to elaborate on what they meant by blitzkrieg. When the question here says, might we talk about a blitzkrieg type of address the problem of policing in Black communities, essentially addressing problems within police departments, addressing problems within prosecutors' offices, addressing problems within courts, etc. Mm-hmm. I wasn't clear on what they meant by blitzkrieg, other than I know what the term means historically, but what do they mean in terms of how that would work here? Are they advocating that we actually bomb these offices? I'm assuming that wasn't meant literally, but anyway.
We need to be, the FBI is using social media now. So be careful, advocates. Just say it. I think there's some other critical questions also about, I think Beverly Booker Ama, I don't know if she wants to come on live or raise her question, but she raised a really critical thing. I'm not trying to overtake you, Kwesi, but I just noticed that.
No, actually, anyone can, because the comments are coming in, rather quickly. So if you catch them, actually, I mean, this is why it's a collective. So if any of us catch something that is, that we want to dig into, by all means. And Jared, as we're swiveling each other in and out, by any means, you can bring Sister Yele in, and I can sit back for a moment as well. So, which question or topic you want to tackle? You want to tackle the one you mentioned, Jared, or Njiba?
I'm being asked that you read the questions because apparently my audio is a mess. So I'm going to hang back.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, folks. So I certainly missed a number of the questions. I'm scrolling up now. Okay, the questions about voting for Biden and the crime bill. There are questions about police and slave catchers. There are questions about overfunding of police and right. Okay, to advocate for Africans. So what I'll try to do is actually roll them all together, and then we can take a stab at it. And I'll limit myself to about a minute and a half. This way we can get as much engagement as possible. So my sense of the talk of defunding, of abolishing police, of essentially replacing them with something from the communities of the people which are surveilled by those forces, is just that. It's really just talk, because unless we have the connecting tissues, right, that give us a compact. By compact, I mean that we are sort of each other's human shield, because we, as Sister Elliott noted early on, we won't over militarize a militarized state, right? That's foolhardy. And so therefore, we have to think about, again, what kinds of resources do we have available to us that could provide a modicum of breathing room while we develop perhaps a real plan of action, right? And I think from that perspective, Todd's, discussion of the review board could be just that, meaning that it is a transitionary, step, a part of a much more protracted process. And so therefore, I don't see it as victory notches that we count on our belts, but I see it more as procedural steps. But the key is that we have to understand that it is a procedural step. That is not a victory. That is not the cause for, a ticker tape parade down Fifth Avenue in Manhattan or downtown Brooklyn. That is not the cause for, a White House photo op to say, yeah, we won and we got a Medal of Freedom for it, right? Which is the irony of many sorts.
it's hard to explain Newark to outsiders because we were taught mostly by Baraka that democracy is the first step toward revolution. Mm-hmm. And that you have democracy by controlling all of the institutions in your community. That's why I'm so down with what the sister is saying, but we're saying that as a goal. Mm-hmm. Which means that the first step is to control the community. First step is to let the police know that if they touch us the wrong way, they're going to be subpoenaed and they're going to go to jail. That's the first step. Now, there are other steps after that. And that's why I'm down with the sister saying, absolutely. But I think that that's the first step. If you know that you step in Newark and you do something wrong, you're going to jail, that's a step. Now, is that enough for a victory? I agree, no, because that's going to be fought all the way. And just to talk to your point, Njia, when one of the judges tried to block this, he said your exact argument. He said, well, what if there's another mayor who has another whole idea of policing, right? And packs his review board with conservatives. So then your whole thing is destroyed. So the argument that you're using from the radical end was used on the conservative end to try to block our progressive, albeit moderate change. So I definitely relate and understand and accept the contradiction that you laid down.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, and I want to just I think that Sister Beverly raised a critical point also. And I think that it goes to this question of how do we control spaces, right? Two things. One, I want to just, hip the audience to Kwame Nkrumah's zonal analysis in the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, which he wrote in 1968. You all can find it online. If you want it, I can certainly hook you up with an electronic copy. But he said that there's a enemy held zone, which, that's straight up obvious. Like, if an enemy held zone is an enemy held zone, like military is rolling up in there. There's a liberated zone, one that's completely free. There's not that many liberated zones in the US. And then of course there's a contested zone, right? And so I think that we need to also begin to analyze our communities, whether you're whether you're in the US, whether you're in Brazil, whether you're on the continent. Are you in a straight up enemy held zone? What can you do in an enemy held zone? What can you do in a contested zone? And then what can you do in a liberated zone? And I think that once we begin to be scientific about even our engagement with some of these institutions, we then begin to realize, what, in Newark, perhaps it's a contested zone and we need to bring all our efforts to Newark. I don't necessarily politically agree with the a citizen review board as a fundamental transformative agent. As you also said, it's a step, but I think also we need to begin to push that it is a step, and that perhaps and politically why it's a step versus it's a solution, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think Sister Beverly made such an amazing point about this question about how do we get the masses. She says, how do we get the masses to think more consciously about the alternative? In the US, it's disturbing that many of us are arguing against addressing overfunding of the police. Some are saying it will be chaotic without enough police, yet they're killing us. So of course there's a contradiction. Exactly. So I mean, and let me just say this again, I hate to harp on this, but I'm a member of the APRP. I've been in the organization for 23 years, and we believe in political education, right? We believe in organizing. We believe in organization over mobilization. And what we see right now with the Black Lives Matter movement is we have a lot of mobilization not necessarily organization, right?
Absolutely.
And so I think we have to push organization and mobilization. And Kwame Ture, our sister raised Kwame Ture. Kwame Ture says this all the time. You know, we can mobilize our people, but can we organize our people?
Right.
Even if we want to do the citizen review board, we have to politically educate people and organize them.
Right.
It's not just about saying let's do a citizen review board, but you don't have any level of organization. And quite frankly, defunding the police is a tactic. I don't know why anyone would argue against funding the police. It just doesn't make any sense. People are killing, and there's millions of dollars going to police forces and institutions, but yet and still your people can't eat. People don't have access to jobs. People don't have access to education. And somebody has the nerve to open their lips and say we shouldn't be defunding the police. That's somebody that quite frankly is ideologically confused.
Absolutely.
And we have to push organization, and we have to begin to say, you know, how do we organize? And quite frankly, people need to be in organizations. You can't be an organization of one. It can't be 3 o'clock in the morning, you burning some incense, reading Malcolm, listening to message to the grassroots. And you think you the most revolutionary. No, man, you're not revolutionary at all. You know, we have to talk about that. And organizations have to have a work-study process where you do work and you also study. That's just my long 90 seconds.
There's a group in Newark called the People's Organization for Progress, and they do exactly what you're talking about. But Dr. Yele, Leah Boggs says, can we hear more from Dr. Yele about tapping into those tools and resources we possess as the people to fight on our own terms? Can we hear more?
Yes, thank you, Leah, for the question.
Yeah,
and I think that actually directly relates to what Sister Mjiba and what you, Todd, have been talking about. With the organize piece. The thing is that we sometimes forget is that African people do know how to be organized, and we do have institutions. Absolutely. We are institution builders. And I've been sitting here, I saw Leah's comment, and I've been sitting here trying to figure out how much to say online about our tools, right? One of our tools, though, is the opposite of what we're doing right now, which is speaking publicly with each other about what we're gonna do. So I encourage people to organize and build institutions and then work quietly without telling your business, right? And Jared does a really good job of talking about this, even in his mixtape manifesto. About, you know, kind of being analog in the digital world. And, you know, we're living a cautionary tale about that, right? We're in the aftermath of a cautionary tale about that. If we look at, you know, the 70s and we look at the Black freedom movement in general, right? But on the note about organizing, I think it's really, really important for us to understand that there are aspects of our culture that are meant to mobilize. You can play the right song and get all the Black people into a space, moving their bodies, giving their heart and soul. But the organizing and the studying is important, and we have institutions for that too. We have a culture around that too. And those are the best practices that we have to pull through from the past, from the left, from our predecessors into this moment. Refine the tools, sharpen the tools for what we need them to do right now. We have women's societies, we have men's societies, we have rites of passage programs. We need to turn these spaces into spaces where political education happens. We need to turn these institutions where, even if we're here to just support Black mothers and deal with maternal mortality issues and, you know, be becoming doulas, we need to turn these into spaces where we're tying what we're doing on a cultural level into what is politically happening. Why do we have such a high maternal mortality rate? It is a political question as well. It's an economic question as well. And obviously it's a racial question, but we need to be doing that. And then like build out those institutions, focus those institutions, make connections with other institutions, but join them and build them, you know, join them and elaborate them, join them and focus them in on issues. And that's what I guess I was talking about earlier in terms of a common mission. Our ancestors have tons. I mean, again, there are tons of examples of not even just organizations, again, that come from here, right? Obviously, we have many in our, we have the AAPRP, we have organizations that are alive and well and in our recent history, but we also have some that are older that allow us to access tools that I am not going to talk about on Crowdcast. Because sometimes, our spiritual traditions, our systems, they are institutions. And, I'm privy to some conversations that are happening right now about people doing even spiritual work around this, which everybody doesn't believe in, but it is a part of our praxis. It is a part of our revolutionary praxis, if we're being honest. So, people are just now thinking, oh, let's get together and direct our resources toward this cause, direct our spiritual resources and our cultural resources and pool money and go to our shrines. And I'm saying, why are we just now having this conversation? These organizations and these institutions, even the spiritual ones, should be built around this type of work and become focused on this type of work. So yeah, I'll stop there because that's definitely more than 90 seconds. But
I really enjoy what you're saying because I think the proof is how, COVID happened and the whole world had to go online. And as we all saw, Black people immediately started having church services on Zoom.
Right.
Like there was barely not even a transition, right? They just said, "Oh, okay." So you're right. Our practices, our institutions have always been there, and will always serve those roles. A tiny book I wrote about Ida B. Wells. I learned about how she was all about organization. She was all about joining organizations, being part of organizations. Even though when those organizations didn't join her,
right.
She was still involved in them or did not attack them. So you're absolutely right in terms of the background we have. We have all of the tools we need, but it might just be a situation that we haven't mobilized. Though ironically, when we talk about mobilization versus organization, we might not have mobilized those tools correctly yet.
Yeah,
maybe we're not in that situation yet.
We're afraid to politicize our organizations. We're
right.
Absolutely.
Says, okay, let me put this on the agenda. We're afraid to take all the allow some space for the fluffy stuff to take a back seat and put some fangs back in these organizations and really use the spaces to do that kind of work because we're afraid that everybody's not going to come along. I'm saying that we've got to let this stuff spread. We've got to be able to pull up and see some African people. We know there's common ground, again, because there's a common struggle. Let's help them find the common institutions, the institutions that matter to them. Let's take up the barbershops and the beauty salons and the other autonomous spaces that just we go to, that we know we there. We know we're in the house, and use those spaces. Why be afraid to bring up a certain conversation in the barbershop once we ever, if we ever get back into barbershop. But you know what I mean? Like, I think that politicizing the spaces that we already occupy and the institutions we already exist in is like an easy thing to do. And that's where these solutions will come from. That's where the subpoena process will, be refined, and we'll have these approaches that are informed not just by the people who have already studied, but it will get more people studying, and we'll get more people to offer some dimensions that maybe we haven't thought about.
Yeah, and I just want to add, there was a question about police unions, but sister, I just want to add that I think that you're making a critical point about organizing in spaces that are already organized. And you mentioned the church and mosque, and also we can't leave out, traditional African religion. And let me just be straight up with everybody. I ain't been baptized. If that's like a requirement for heaven, I'm going to hell. I actually don't even believe in organized religion. But what I do know is that Jesus Christ was a revolutionary. I know that there are revolutionary actions and movements in the Quran, right? In Islam. I know that there are revolutionary action and movements in African traditional religion. So if that's where our people are, we need to politicize our people in these spaces, right? And ultimately it means, like you said, not being afraid to say that this is we can't be afraid to say that people won't come if we're politicizing. And the other thing is, quite frankly, we have to say that these spaces should not be spaces for capital accumulation. Let's not confuse ourselves. Let's be clear why the churches went online. They went online so they can keep getting their tithes. Let's be real clear about that. You know what I'm saying? Because many of our churches, right, regardless as to whether you are, because here in Ghana, people were like, oh no, we can't close, we can't, do lockdown for churches. And ultimately it was because you want to get people to bring your money, right? So we need to also challenge these spaces, these organized spaces, which could be used to organize revolutions, to then say, this should not be a space for your personal individual capital accumulation, which speaks back to all of our ideology, right? Like, who are we ideologically aligned to, right? Are you part of the people or part of the anti-people's class? And this is what you need to ask yourself. Am I part of the people's class or the anti-people's class? And that goes from the church to the traditional religion, to the unions, to the barbershops, to whatever, the book clubs, whatever you find yourself in. And I think I'm not sure if it's brother or sister, because I don't know, asked a question about what about the amount of power that police unions hold? How can the people disrupt that trilateral power center between the police union, the mayor, and the city council? This is an excellent question. I'm going to leave this to my comrades to answer.
Yeah, I don't really know.
We're fighting our police union, so I don't know the answer to that.
Police unions are like the Klan, just a different uniform sometimes. Like, I mean, they're so well protected. I mean, there's layers there. People know exactly how it operates.
Yeah, but let me ask this though. I mean, like, here's the thing. Like, I think that there's
Jared.
What'd you say?
Jared posted that one response to police unions would be more unionization among ourselves.
Absolutely, that's exactly what I was going to say, Jared. We read minds. Yeah, that's it. Exactly. Yeah. Because think about it, like, well, there's school unions, there's teachers unions, there's shop unions, and we could even form unions. Be clear that the police unions and these other unions, they depend on auxiliary services to do their job. So you can do some level of organization. I think S says something. Once we mobilize and organize, are there some tools that you might recommend for gaining access to traditional institutions for change? For example, how might we get access to having legislation passed for our communities? How might we get access to traditional sources of large capital for building up our communities? Does anyone want to take that one?
I just want to go back to what you had said that I really enjoyed. One of the things I'm looking at as a media scholar is that this COVID thing, in terms of putting us all on Zoom, I mean, is it me or is there like a Black conference like every night or every other night?
Yeah, it's a lot.
I mean, so to go back to what you're saying, that, if we could just bum rush these conferences and saying, are we talking about this?
Yeah.
And we could decide whatever this is. I mean, we could be talking to anybody from the Black press to Al Sharpton to anybody and at least forcing the issue, because they're literally on a Zoom every night. Here in New York, WBLS not only has open line on the radio, but now 2 hours, 3 hours of Zoom every week. So this is exactly what you're talking about. I think, again, and it goes back to what Dr. Yelly was saying, is that we have the tools, we're just afraid to use them.
Yeah, we're afraid to use them in a certain way. I think even going back to the question of spiritual, religious, institutions, cultural institutions.
That's the number one institution.
Yeah,
and I think that's the one we're not using. Not yet. We're touching at it.
Someone said that we should just not join the organizations if they're not having a certain political conversation. I think definitely divesting it may be necessary sometimes, right? If you make your attempt to try to bring a certain question onto the table, a certain dialogue, and that organization rejects that, then okay, everybody's not going to come. Everybody can't come to the party. But I think it's really, really important. I see the work being done. It has been done. I mean, even, I mean, you have the Deacons for Defense. Somebody had an interesting conversation up in them churches about armed resistance and self-defense, right? So it can happen, and we have examples of it happening. We have people in churches that I know personally who are talking about food security. They're talking about white supremacy. And it's not just all about Jesus Christ up in the pulpit every Sunday. They're using the space. They're using the church grounds to grow food and teach self-empowerment and self-reliance. So again, this is definitely possible. We just have to be courageous and be intentional about spreading these ideas, even if people don't love us for doing it, you know? I wanted to also, I think Oya Kali, she's been really kind of, she's been chatting and kind of bringing up the question about voting and voting as an institution, and what alternatives there may be, what should be the plan in November, going back to kind of Todd's original discussion. So I just wanted to make sure that that was heard.
Let me say, me, I don't vote. I ain't voted since 1992. It's a waste of my damn energy. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I forgot we're doing professional stuff. I don't vote. I mean, I think that voting in a capitalist, anti-democratic system, in my position, my political position, does nothing, right? Particularly if you're not in electoral college. However, I do know people that do vote, right? Revolutionaries that vote, progressive people that vote. And I think the question about voting is about what are you voting for and who are you voting for, right? And are you reinforcing institutional racism and race and class-based discrimination in voting? Now, if I were to be voting during this election, I would write in Kwame Ture or something, because I surely wouldn't waste my time to go and vote for Biden or Trump. That's just my opinion. But you know, for people who choose to vote, I think that you have to ask yourself, what exactly am I voting for? Who am I voting? Are they representing me really? Like, do they really care about me? Can I roll up to Congress or the House of Representatives or even my own representative and be like, yo, Representative X, I think that we should do X, Y, and Z. Do you really have a positive relationship to your labor? Do you really have a positive relationship to the means of production? Do you really have a positive relationship to democracy because you vote every 4 years? That's just my opinion. Maybe other people vote.
Well, I wanted to know, I'm curious as a follow-up question, what everyone's thoughts are about the whole notion of defensive voting, right? As you know, as many, you know, of our folks are saying out in the world that, you know, a vote for a non-vote is a vote for Trump, or, you know, not voting for Biden is a vote for Trump, essentially re-entering us into this particular regime. So what is your response to that?
If I may jump in.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So I'll try to tie this into of course, the larger discussion about militarizing police forces as relates to this election. Both Biden, I should say this first, for those who plan to vote, however they're going to vote, both Biden and the would have been Democratic nominee Sanders has said it very clearly that they are neither defunding nor abolishing the police. And they have not minced words. They're very clear. And so for those of us who hope against hope, hoping that this country will live up to what it claimed to be, the managers of this corporation has made it very clear that they find it cute what professional social justice actors are doing in the streets, but they're not with it. and therefore, I find it, I think, laughable, the argument for voting and for not voting. So if one wants to vote, I'm not really sure what that ultimately accomplishes, in terms of the specific issue of militarizing police, or the greater concern, which is the health and development of our communities and our families. I don't see how voting actualizes either of those. And if you do, I'm very much open to hear, that argument. Secondly, when it comes to the idea of choosing between, two evils, Christian pun intended, evil is evil. So I was never a fan to say that, well, if I don't choose one, I'm choosing the other. We're dealing with two arms of the same public body, the same political body. And so whether I'm slapped with the right hand or left hand, it still hurts. So therefore the question is, where does that leave, one, two, in terms of action? My sense is that, is looking inward. What's the barometer? What's the health, of our families? I remember a play that I saw when I was an undergrad, and all of you, I think, will remember some iteration of it, which is this play was on Black Solidarity Day, right? And some of you remember Black Solidarity Day,
yes,
right?
Wow.
Right.
That brings back memories.
Yes,
college memories.
And the whole notion of Black Solidarity Day is that was a day that folks would intentionally, people of African ancestors would intentionally absent from the process of, before voting, so sort of, show their numerical, value and strength. But it was an inward looking process, which is what I'm trying to get at. And so I think if voting accomplishes, little in terms of, improving the quality of our families and communities, both institutionally, infrastructure, and otherwise, then that could be a day, where, the focus is actually inward, is actually, for example, here in Brooklyn, there's a favorite restaurant of ours, which I won't name because, we're probably being surveilled and recorded. But the restaurant, is an African-based restaurant. Very good people. And what they've been doing through this COVID period is that they've been staying in business, against the losses, and they've been feeding the elders in the community. To me, that's revolutionary in the sense of transforming infrastructures and resources to serve people, to serve our communities, right?
I agree with all of that. And this is going to sound interesting because I'm going to try to combine both views here. I think voting is only about democracy, and democracy is only about controlling your own community. So I agree. If the vote is not about you controlling your own community, then it's useless. Now, again, in my situation, I live in a city where white people have not wanted to live for 50, 60 years. So the vote you can't talk about not voting in Newark because they will hurt you, right? Because voting is the only way we get resources for our community, and we have power over the limited power over institutions we have in our own community. So it kind of depends on where you're at. So for instance, where I live, there is no white elite that gives out grants to buffers who then buffer between us and our people, because our white institutions don't do that. Our white institutions act like they're on our side, right? So our white institutions fund Black film festivals where we watch Haley Garima. So it's a very strange situation that, for instance, that I'm from, and I know other communities to a certain extent, like Detroit, are like that as well. So I think it just kind of depends on where you're at, because what you're saying, Kwasi, about inward, that's exactly what we do. But we say the vote is not only part of that, it's actually essential to that, because that's how you control your own institutions, and that's how you control people who represent you. Right. In Newark, I feel represented, and I know that's a minority in the African world, but I feel they're actually represented. And even though we fight with Baraka, we understand him. And I think that inward thing is absolutely correct. I think that there might be more than one way to be inward.
Right. Indeed.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Jiba.
No. I just wanted to say that S raised a question. If you do not vote and do not have a relationship with your politicians, what organizations have you been referencing, and for what reason are you advocating? Organizing to what end? Voting is a tool within the toolbox of the American political machine. Voting does not exist in a vacuum. So I don't know if anyone wants to tackle that. Maybe Kwasi, you can respond to that.
Sure. Very quickly. So let me massage what I said a moment ago just a bit, in that it depends on the particular time frame and the location in which you're voting. So, for instance, if you're voting election year, such as this year, right? I was referring to the electoral cycle, right? Because most of our lives are relatively untouched by the federal government in a real way. It's really the local governance. And so, for example, if people living in counties or living in these municipalities that are directly impacted by the funds, by the allocation of certain resources, by the block grants, and so on, voting, has a different degree of maneuverability, right? And so strategically, I think, again, voting can be a operational tool, but again, it has to be, with the caveat that this is simply operational, right? In other words, viewing, electoral politics as an end, as a celebration, as a destination, I think is foolhardy. But again, locally, given the dynamics, and this is why I'm always a fan of never giving anyone a prescription that is absolute, that is across the board, because that's a recipe for failure. What I'm suggesting in terms of the excellent question that was raised is that you do what you can to the best of your ability, given the resources and circumstances in which you operate. And I think that can work, sort of elastically anywhere we are. And so in Todd's case or Detroit's case, or here in Brooklyn, there are certain, arrangements that can be made in the interim to give cover while looking inward and plotting and planning. And I agree with Sister Yelly wholeheartedly, about the strategy of, being very calculated in terms of even what we share in this forum. In fact, even being on this platform, right? So we have to have, I think, also a certain maroon quality. And I don't want to celebrate or glorify the maroon, but what I'm trying to say is that a certain degree of stealth, a certain degree of, okay, we come together, we disperse. I kind of liken it to the sort of stateless societies that are able to come together for a purpose of war and disperse back into their own neighborhoods when the circumstances arise. And I think we have to be that agile and nimble, but strategically, again, using the resources we have, given the circumstances, but also they have to be, I think, framed as part of a process, a part of a procedure that we can't claim in the immediate, or microwave victories based on the election of an individual or based on the the ways in which the media coverage is celebrating certain communities or certain activism or certain celebrities as a as a notch, a victory.
Right. I think that that's a really important set of points. I think it brings back to mind the notion I had about particularizing. Mm-hmm. A lot of people vote, and that's the beginning and end of their political will. That's just, the expression of their political will. I did it. I voted. Voting's the destination, right? As you pointed out. But I think that part of the political education has to be voting as a part of a larger process. Voting has to be particularized. The why of voting, if it is strategic, if it's about agility, if it's about strategically working in a specific zone for a specific end goal that directly affects our lives, then we have to, again, particularize and educate people about that. So it's not vote or die, it's vote for this, vote it towards this end. And one other thing I wanted to add is I agree with the point that on the federal level, right, these elections and this electoral cycle that we're currently in doesn't directly affect maybe our lives in significant ways that we can always feel. But going back to Mjiba's point about Africa and Africa's role in the liberation of itself and the diaspora, federal, the what happens at the federal level certainly affects the international community. And who we are and how we are globally. So I wanted to also, put that in the conversation. It's not that, because it matters maybe less, for us in our lived experience every day, and electoral politics itself is, just a total scam. But you know, I mean, Trump backing out of, you know, all kinds of international agreements in our names and stuff like that. You know, those things I think we should also be thinking about. But again, voting cannot be the end. It can't be the end. It can't be that. And I think that part of marooning is the inward focus, right? That's another thing that was in my report, is looking inward and looking at what our agenda is, what our list of demands is, what we want out of a specific type of voting strategy, and being strategic about how we vote, voting together around certain issues. Then I can respect voting. Then I can see the importance of it.
Yeah, and can I just say that I agree, and be clear, I will not vote. I will not be voting locally or federally. But if people choose to vote, I'm down with that. But just be clear what you're voting for, right? Just be clear that if you're voting at the local level, you're voting because you know that, you know, Kwesi or whoever is gonna, you know, make sure that there's money for an after school program, or there's money for the Meals on Wheels, or there, you know, there's not defunding of schools. Like there has to be a political strategy behind what we're doing. And I think too often we fall into this notion that, oh, our ancestors died for the vote. They didn't die for the vote, though. They died for human rights. They died to be treated as human beings, in which they already were, right? And I think that the problem that we have is that we boil down our freedom to voting and to democracy, and we somehow believe that U.S. democracy is the only type of democracy, the only type of political system. And we also believe that if we just vote in the right African or Black people, somehow the system will change and our conditions will change. I know people are going to probably scream at me and slap me in the face, but I'm going to say it. Our boy Barack Obama had 8 years. And let me ask you this: did the conditions of African people's lives drastically change? And Sister Ayala, you went to the continent, and I think that you make an excellent point. You know, foreign policy certainly dictates a continent, but I would say, why we need to be pushing the African continent to manage her own affairs and not be dependent on any type of financial bailouts from the US or anybody else. Now, if you're on the continent or in the Caribbean or other spaces where we're talking about voting in a progressive revolutionary party or group of people who are going to transform the economic system and put the resources in the hands of the people, I'm down for voting. I think we had some more questions, Kwesi. I don't know if you saw them. Let me see if I can scroll up and find them real quick.
And I just want to emphasize what Todd is saying in the comments: voting for control. If that needs to be a new slogan, then let it be a new slogan. But I think when people get that misconception that our ancestors died for the right to vote, they saw voting as a strategy. And many of them were very clear about the control and the power that it gives to communities, right? And I think if we've lost sight of that particular aspect of the strategy, then that's our shortcoming, not theirs. You know, we're projecting that backwards on them. And also, our goals don't have to be the same as their goals, guys. We can evolve and we can refine and we can build on what they began for us. So just because they died for the right to vote doesn't mean that's where our only focus should be. Like, we have to, you know, take that and then move ahead with it, move beyond, right? We honor them and we move ahead.
Kwesi, have you seen Oya's question about we are at a crossroads? It's my sincere hope that we leverage this opportunity and demand land. Is the only solution to police terrorism separation now, reparations now?
Well, my question will be, land where? And reparations from whom? I sort of consider reparations to the analogy of attempting to commit arson in a fire station. And in the sense that, Malcolm found this out, I think, the very difficult way, bring to trial the very plunderers of human rights charges in their courts. In other words, there's a certain level of futility if by reparations, we mean some sort of monetary payback, some apology, some plaque somewhere, some monument somewhere in a national mall, some commemorative stamp, and the list goes on. So I'm not sure, given the tenor of the various reparational discussions, where that might lead. I'm curious, so I watched the developments and I watched the organizations who are fighting for reparations, but I think it's very short-sighted, and ultimately it's an appeal to the very corporation that has, excuse me, the very corporation, the corporate forces that have that have had its knee on your neck. And so I see that approach ultimately as defeatist. And the question of land. Here's one of the ironies of how, for those of us who are in academia, how academics have gotten it so wrong and has been essentially, co-defendants against our peoples, in the sense that, scholars celebrate, the so-called milestone from slavery to freedom. Now, wherever this land of freedom is, I don't know. Show me where it is, because I can't find it with my GPS. But I think by over celebrating this notion of freedom, by over celebrating the movement, the so-called great migrations from the South away from land into these urban spaces with no land, right? I think that over celebrates that narrative of it has really, taken a certain viable set of tools from underneath the feet, of these earlier ancestors in these United States. And so, the question again is, where would that land be? And I'm assuming that, given the discussion we're having, land as a modicum for a certain kind of, public safety, a certain kind of, liberated zone or safe space, that we can live and bleed. And the question is, land where? We're renters at best in this land. And in the African continent or in the Caribbean, where I was born in Jamaica, it's even more dubious, because many of the folks in both spaces believe that because they are, quote unquote, Black or African, then, they don't share in the problematics that have been essentially distributed by global white supremacy. They feel immune, from that virus, which is actually the more dangerous thing. So again, my question is, land where, if in fact, land should be a target, within our multi-scope, firing range.
Free the land. I'm all for that becoming a slogan again, a popular slogan again. I'm gonna say that everywhere I go. Free the land. That's gonna be me from now on. Free the land.
Yeah, and I think that you're right. I think that we need to be talking about land, but I think we need to be talking about the unification of the African continent. That is our land, right? I think that everything that comes out of our mouth as Africans in the diaspora needs to be talking about the unification and primacy of Africa. Because be clear, when that land is free and unified, you, my friend, will not have the same contradictions in the US or Jamaica or Brazil or Colombia, right? So I'm down for freeing the land, and I'm down for saying that we need land, and the reparations that we need the reparations we need the US imperialists and corporations to give money back to the African continent and African people for all the raw resources and human resources that they stole. We need the IMF and World Bank to immediately erase all the debt in Africa. That's the reparations we need. You ain't got to cut me a check. You got to cut the African continent a check. We need Microsoft to pay the Congolese the rightful fair price for coltan. That's the reparations we need, right? We need to go to the global market and be able to negotiate cocoa at a fair price so that our cocoa farmers in Ghana can actually eat the chocolate that they produce the cocoa for. Can you imagine a chocolate bar in Ghana is 10 Ghana cedis and most cocoa farmers have not had a chocolate bar? That's the kind of reparations we need.
Right. Someone brought up a really important point in the comments that Gaddafi did attempt this unification of the continent, was killed for it by our under the auspices of our Black president and Hillary Clinton. So how do we move ahead and how do we move toward this unification, knowing that there is a concerted effort to work against this, and we know people, particularly those of us who live in DC, we know people who work for the State Department. The State Department puts a lot of time and effort and energy and resources toward building what they call a Pan-African file, because they know, like those of us who study this know, that the unification of Africa and Pan-Africanism is a huge threat still today, right? So how do we navigate that, knowing that there are so many forces against that happening? Am I not supposed to ask questions because I'm on the
No, you're supposed to ask questions. And you know what? I'm thinking, because Kelly asked us for marching orders, and I'm like, we're like the collective. We can't give you marching orders. We have to collectively come up with our own marching orders. I'm wondering, what the masses think as well as us, because honestly, if we had the solutions, we would be free right now. So we don't have all the solutions. So that's also what I'm thinking. Like, what is our next step? How do we move forward? And how do all of these folks who have joined us, who have, as many years of experience and have some very valid contributions, what are their thoughts?
Yeah, because we're definitely unpacking the problem, right? And I think we're doing a good job of looking at this historically. We're taking inventory of what we have and what we've tried. So now we're in a process of refinement together. So that's an important point.
Can I jump in quickly here?
You're the chair.
I am. No. I think I was the moderator.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, certainly as we're about 50 minutes out from 9 o'clock, as we approach sort of wrap up, and as Sister Yele mentioned a moment ago, part of our immediate inventory from this conversation, this introspective, work, is that there's some key takeaways, to fortify us, until the next time we reconvene. And if I may, I'll list 3 takeaways, at least that I gathered, and I would suspect that a number of the global community people here gathered as well. One is that when it comes to the militarization of the police, that this phenomena is more or less an ongoing work of the state, and neither political parties have any desire or any will to demolish, abolish, defund, or otherwise replace with community forms of policing, and therefore the question becomes, does the mechanism of voting allow us to demilitarize or even dismiss or dissolve the very idea of centralized, locally militarized forces in our communities that are uninvited for the most part? That's something that we all have to sit back in our homes, in our communities, in our organizations, and really think through. So secondly, takeaways that by no means do we pretend to be any vanguards of revolution. We are thinkers, parents, activists, etc., that are really want to provide, this as one of several, spaces to think. And I'm reminded of James Baldwin, who something to the effect of, when you're engaged in a struggle, two things you don't have the luxury of, which is rest and the ability to think, because rest is a prerequisite for thinking. And, because you're too busy fighting. And therefore, I'm also reminded of, a group of ancestors who fall under the umbrella of Maroons, whether in Jamaica, where I was born, or in other parts of the Americas. And one of the takeaways from them that applies here is that they were able to do two things simultaneously and protractedly well. They were able to build community and culture while fighting a war against Dutch, British, French, and Portuguese colonists at the same time. And in some cases, they were fighting, a sort of pan-European colonists. In the case of Brazil, they're fighting the Dutch and the Portuguese colonies at the same time. And so I'll repeat that they were able to build community through culture by deciding what African-based strategies, techniques, rituals were the most effective for the environment and for the weight of the moment, and at the same time do this while fighting war on the run, right? And I think we find ourselves in a similar situation, not the same. That's why Sister Ellie noted, sort of as a third takeaway, is that we have to recalibrate the tools that have been tried and in fact tested by our ancestry, right? Because we live in a moment that is not, a replica of theirs. And so we have to recalibrate, not necessarily, remove, but recalibrate, some of the strategies and some of the tools, that they put to use. And so, for instance, voting during Reconstruction, essentially, transformed the South. And so Reconstruction was essentially Africans rebuilding the South effectively, right? With over, 1,500 elected officials, through local and state government. So the ways in which, for a particular purpose, those tools can in fact be a transitory point. The challenge for our ancestors was they thought they were free as a result. They miscalculated, right? They underestimated the world in which, the terrain in which they live. But like them, we face a similar challenge, which is that we can't stay here, but we can't go there either. Meaning Africa is not the Africa that Sister Njiba has articulated yet, right? And so we're in this in-between space that we have to therefore, I think, have short-term strategies for the in-between, but also a vision for, okay, what am I building for, right? And that's why I always will advocate for, starting within the organization of your family. And then as linked families, in linked communities, we can move at a dime with the kind of clarity and precision that's required for the moment.
And I'm so thankful, Kwesi, that you mentioned vision. And thank you for bringing out those points. Those are really great takeaways. And the fact that those takeaways don't just come from us, the panelists, like most of that was drawn out by the community speaking with us and raising important questions. But vision is so important, creativity and the ability to imagine the future that we want, imagine the alternatives to this, and help other people envision and imagine what else is going to, because I think what hinders people sometimes and what paralyzes people sometimes, especially in the face of militaristic aggression, is the inability to see a life outside of that, the inability to envision something else being their reality, the inability to envision a world that is not us, living in a society that is not capitalist, for instance, living in a society where there aren't police. How are you safe? Well, Africans on the continent were safe for thousands of years without something called the police, right? So sometimes the vision involves Sankofa, right? Sometimes it involves looking backwards at a world that did exist because that world shows us human possibilities. But we have to, again, I'm always about drawing things through to the present, pulling the best practices from the past, learning from those institutions of ours that have worked, that have existed. I always tell people there's an Adinkra symbol for democracy. It's been here. We know democracy. We know how to do democracy. Let's do democracy the way we do democracy. Let's figure out what that is, what that's about. So in vision. I think we need to say that a lot. We need to keep that in our mouths.
Okay. Do we have any other or final, thoughts from, the global townspeople?
What's this last comment about bond and security markets? When they get their surety bonds revoked and that putting pressure on local governments and businesses.
Okay.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, somebody got to take that to know about that. I don't know nothing about that.
Yeah.
Can you explain more, commenter, like how that works?
I mean, I'm wondering if Giddy 84, is it Giddy 84? G Diddy 84, my bad. Maybe wants to come on and tell us a little bit about that if we have the next minute or so, or maybe just send us to a website that we can look at about that. Because I'm gonna do a quick Google search, but that doesn't mean anything. That's not real research.
Well, if I take a quick stab at it. I'm familiar with the bond market when it comes to government-backed bonds with the government buy. For example, the Federal Reserve chairman, Jerome Powell, recently issued a statement that the government is going to buy back a lot of the corporate bonds. Basically, the government-backed and issued bonds. But I don't think he or she's referring to that. I think referring to the sort of the payment of settlements. Through these bonds. And so it's funny, and if I catch what the brother sister was talking about, there's a comedian from Atlanta, Roy Woods, I think, who talked about this in one of his shows last year, where anyway, he joked about, rather than please pay out these settlements, right, for the violence that they inflict upon our community peoples, then essentially, he joked that they should pay cops more to essentially snitch on each other. It should be a stitch fund. Now it's hilarious in one sense, but the point is, it said incentivize, internal snitching, which sort of reverse what we do in some of our neighborhoods here in the States, which is don't snitch to the police, right? And what the comedian is trying to poke at, and I'm not sure if the brother sister here is doing similar, but it's really it's basically following the money, right? That there's actually a trail, and so in the history of policing, centralized policing in this country, the way that early cops got paid was by essentially summons that they issued. There was no salary, and so essentially it was a summons that they issued. And if any of you have gotten a parking or speeding ticket, you're familiar with the circus, right? That's how they got paid, by issuing summons. They would collect the fees from that. And so that was the incentives to get people to come on board into this thing. Later it evolved into militarized policing, but that's sort of the earlier ancestors, of that, the payment portion of it. And so in the age of militarized policing, we know that federal and local laws combine to incentivize cops to, particularly the SWAT teams, to seize and take into their possession anything that they find in these raids, right? And so, in other words, there's a financial incentive, for the work of these SWAT teams, these militarized SWAT teams that do roll up, on communities with these Humvees, with these tanks, with these, doorbusters that is meant for the theater of war in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so that documentary that Brother Jarrett suggested early on, "Do Not Resist," is an excellent piece because it gets into that incentivized system that essentially allows these police forces, to make a handsome profit of seizing anything that they claim during a seizure or raid. So I'm not sure if that's on or off target, but that I think that's some of what the person's referring to. That there's a financial incentive to, the over militarization, aggressiveness of these police forces.
Yeah, moderator, I think we have one last question.
Sure.
Jasmine, and I don't know if we can take it now or push it, but how can we find Black political organizations? This is from Jasmine.
Mm-hmm.
How can we find Black political organizations in our community to continue these conversations if these organizations aren't very loud in making themselves known? I think that's an excellent question.
It is. I'll defer as moderator to you two to have the last words.
Sister, I'll defer to you, please. You're welcome.
That was a great question, Jasmine. We find ourselves sometimes living in organizational deserts, places where there just aren't a lot of Black folks. If you're specifically looking for a Black political organization, I would say start online. Go to the ones that are kind of more well-known, mainstream. NAACP is everywhere, and then work your way outward from there. You may have to start one, or you, again, may have to go into another type of organization, institution, and politicize it from there. And bring the, like-minded people around you, and then, again, study and seeking models for how to build that.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think that that we need to, there's like millions of African organizations, and some people have like 3.5 members, right? And then you have another one like a block over with like 3.5 members, and some of them like overlap. So I think we really need to also begin to build coalitions of these organizations, right? No one is saying you got to like lead your organization with 3.5 people because everybody wants some power, right? Which is a larger contradiction, which we need to resolve. But I do think that we need to begin to build political coalitions that have similar ideological framing around many of these things, right? And so, for example, if you are in a space where there is the NAACP or the National Black United Front or the AAPRP or an organization that puts Black elected officials in power, if they think that that's the right solution, there needs to be a coalition where everyone can have one common goal that they can fight towards. I think that that's one of the things that we're missing in the African community, and really not just in the diaspora in the US, but across global Africa. We need to be building these coalitions and letting our voice be heard from that perspective. And so I think what might be interesting, I don't know if the House is interested, but it might be interesting if we use one of our topics to talk about the art of organization and the challenges and struggles that we have building, sustaining, organizations throughout the African world. I don't know if that's a good fit, but that just seems like a good fit for me.
Oh, Sister Njiba, thank you, because guess what? That is one of our topics.
Exactly.
Yes. So, global community folks, we thank you very much for tuning in, and thank you very much for a lot of your virtual and certainly heartfelt and really thought out comments, questions, and even disagreements, because we need all of it. We're certainly not looking for praise poetry. So we need all of the critical, the constructive, and also the nourishing, perspective that we have to bear. And so we want to thank you all very much. And really, the next step is that we're going to tackle this issue of monuments, Confederate flags, and anything that falls under that purview. But then, of course, the next topic after that will be organizing and organizations that we'll deal with. So look out for the next briefing. It's going to be concise so we can digest it and use it as a platform so that we have the same language in terms of our conversation, because we understand that we come from, sometimes distinct, upbringing, surroundings, different path to bring us all here. And so we want to respect those paths, but give us a common ground that we can, have this engagement. So please do look out for and do digest, and we keep it as, very concise and to the point. And then, we'll have another one of these where we, again, look inward and really, tap into and tackle this as we build. And so we certainly want to put the best energies for you and your family to be healthy, to be healthier, to be safe, granted where we are, what you have to work with. And know that, the first and perhaps most important organization we have is our families. So let's build from inside out, right? And tap into all the Black African powers that we have available to us, and bring it to bear. I think we have an email that I think Brother Jared will share if you want to contact us. But we so far want to remain amorphous. We want to remain sort of anonymous because of reasons that many of us know, but certainly we're here to serve, the global African world. We're not here for any other purpose than that. And so we purposely don't want to be, at least for now, an organization, but we want to be able to contribute to organizing, coalition building for the African world, which means being amorphous, being nimble is to our advantage. And so until next time, be healthier, be safe, and be well.
Oh, could Jared tell us where the link will be, just in case people want to watch it again?
Okay.
Jared, can you tell us where the link is going to be? Right here. Okay, so the link will be right here. I don't want to hear. Thank you all. I'm sure it's on the Blackish think tank. Blacklash think tank.
It's late in Ghana. It's like tomorrow in Ghana.
It's like 1:00 in the morning, so please don't mind me at all.
Okay.
Thank you so much, everyone. Done well. Done well. Peace.
If you're willing to fight for it.
Yes.